What I'd quite be interested to start off with is maybe you growing up and whether or anyone in your family was horsey and if that influenced you on your path to obviously where you are now.
I think the influence was that there was no one horsey
Really?
in my family. No, absolutely no one. Well, the closest was I had an uncle who had a couple of ponies but didn't really do much with them. But my immediate family, I'm one of 5 boys, so
Yeah.
I've got 4 brothers, and I thought that some of them would be interested, but none of them were interested. And what happened was I was born in Essex.
Yeah.
My father was a farmer in Essex, and he had rented a farm there, and he wasn't making any money. He had 5 boys, needed to make some money, so he went and got a job in the city working as a loss adjuster. Kept the farm for a while. He ended up actually buying the farm and then selling it almost immediately and made a bit of money on it. But he bought a house in Kent in 1970.
Wow.
So I was very young. We moved over here and had a little bit of land, 25 acres, and he was renting the fields out to people with horses. And so I decided that I wanted to ride, and so I was begging these people with these horses in the fields if I could ride them. And that's how it started, really. I started riding horses. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I didn't really have anyone to teach me. I think the first 6 months I rode without a saddle, which I think actually in hindsight was a really good thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think, later in life when I was doing other things with horses, I had plenty of stickability, shall we say.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't really till I got involved with the pony club that I started to hopefully learn a little bit more. But trying to persuade my parents to buy ponies and things like that was almost impossible. And they never touched them at all. I mean, I don't think my mother would have ever touched the pony.
No.
And, I don't think my dad, I said it to a few people, he didn't muck out my pony or do anything to it at all. And I only remember one day I was so ill in bed and he mucked my pony out for me. And that's the only time he had ever done anything to help. Not to help, that's not fair.
No.
Because he did help in other ways. I'm not saying he didn't help, but physically help.
Yeah.
And so it just grew from there. And when I joined the pony club and started going to pony club camp and starting to get friends with other people, and I'd never had any lessons, but I started to have a few lessons at pony club camp, and that's what got me going, really. And then we were doing tetrathlon. There was a few of us doing tetrathlon.
So just for people who don't know, what is tetrathlon?
Well, tetrathlon was running, riding, swimming and shooting. So It's the sort of modern pentathlon without the fencing.
Yeah.
And to start off with in the pony club, they had a big problem because there was very few boys in the pony club and they were leaving very early and they didn't want to have anything to do with it. So it was almost exclusively girls, not quite, but it was heading that way. And they wanted to encourage boys to stay in the pony club and get involved. And so they brought in tetrathlon just for the boys. It's now for boys and girls. But we had a team. We were part of the Tick and Pony Club. We had a team. We were pretty good, and we were qualifying for the nationals each year, which it doesn't sound that big, but it was pretty big at the time. Yeah, it really was. I mean, I'm not involved in the pony club anymore, but I don't think it's anything like it used to be. I mean, when we had Pony Club camp, for instance, there would be 60 kids sleeping in tents.
Wow.
With mobile stables, with all their ponies there, and we would be there for a week, and we'd go home one afternoon for a quick shower during the week. But apart from that, I mean, we must have absolutely stunk. and it was just, I think from the age of about 13 or 14 to triathlon, we were a pretty good team.
Yeah.
And we got to meet a lot of other people as well. I mean, that's how we got sort of, as a pony club, we got to know Fred French from West Kent Mepham, whose daughter then went on and won the gold medal at the Olympics in modern pentathlon.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's quite, it was pretty good. And we had some great times. I mean, the pony club was... I don't know whether it's the same as it was. I don't think it can be.
No.
Not partly because of health and safety and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the things we used to get up to, you just wouldn't be able to do now.
No.
It was pretty funny. Yeah. I mean, we didn't do anything horrendous.
No.
We really didn't. But we were mischievous, that's for sure. And, when you've got 60 odd kids being looked after by 4 or 5 adults, and as we got older, we became the adults. And so Pete Bull and myself, we were best mates when we were kids, we used to, when we got to once we got to a certain age, I think we were probably 18 or something like that, you could still go to Pony Club camp, but I mean, we were a bit old for it. Yeah. So we went in as what they called dossers, and the dossers were there to put out the dressage arenas, put up the show jumps, set up courses, and just do all the physical work that the kids weren't doing. And then we misbehaved while we were doing that as well. Yeah. But then we realised that the adults who'd been looking after us when we were 13 and 14 were getting pissed every night.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we were doing it then.
Yeah.
And we just had a great time. We really did. And when I was at Sutton Valence School, and when I did my O-levels as they were then, and then I went to Maidstone Boys Grammar just to do my A-levels. Yeah. When I left, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I just thought, I saw an advert in the Kent Messenger at the time. I mean, you didn't have online and things, so it was in the paper, there was an advert for looking for someone to work in a point-to-point yard at Charing.
Interesting. So that was my next question, is how do you go from that, and obviously family not being overly horsey, to then, or nearly not horsey at all, to then sort of where you are in the racing world, really. Yeah. So point-to-point yard, where was that? Sorry, again?
Charing. So it wasn't far from Charing Racecourse for a chap called Vic Smith.
Yeah.
And I'd never sat in a racehorse before. I'd never had anything to do with them, and I was riding. We were in the pony club. I mean, apart from your uncle, there wasn't many kids who could ride jump the jumps, should I say, to the level that needed for the show jumping and the eventing. So we were doing the tetrathlon, so we were jumping the same cross-country jumps that the events team were jumping. But there was only, at our time, I think there was only one girl who could jump those jumps.
Wow.
And then there was Pete and I and David Townsend. And so we basically did all the teams because we could jump. We could jump the jumps, and it didn't matter how good a dressage test you did, which, believe me, ours was pretty awful when we were doing the eventing. Our dressage test was just awful, but you had to be able to jump the cross country course.
Yeah, of course.
So when I left school, I thought, I don't know what I want to do. Saw this advert and thought, well, let's give it a go. And I'll do that for 6 months or even maybe a year and see how it goes.
Yeah.
I ended up staying there for 3 years and just absolutely loved every minute of it.
Oh, good.
I was, and people think I'm exaggerating. I promise this is not an exaggeration. We used to, the horses would come in for cubbing at that time. That was sort of August, wasn't it?
Yeah.
All started. So they would come in just before that. So I think they come in on the 1st of August. And then I wouldn't have a day off. And this isn't because I couldn't have a day off. I could have had a day off if I'd wanted to, but I didn't want to. So from the 1st of August through till the end of May, which is when the season sort of finished.
Wow.
I didn't have a day off. I didn't want a day off. And when I say I didn't have a day off, I didn't have Christmas Day. I didn't have Boxing Day. I still worked on those days. And the guy I was working with was Bob Lancaster. And he was the same. I mean, he just lived for the horses.
Yeah.
And he taught me a hell of a lot. He taught me I would say 80 or 85% good things and 15% not so good. and I mean the not so good is in, and I didn't know at the time, but he was feeding the horses so well. It was proper old-fashioned feeding. I mean, they had a linseed mash once a week. And he was mixing up all these different bits to make sure it was absolutely spot on. The horses were so fat in hindsight, and although they were worked hard, they weren't worked hard enough for the amount of food that was going in the other end. And so when they went to the races, they always looked an absolute picture.
Yeah.
But they needed about 4 or 5 races before they got themselves fit enough to go and do themselves justice. But he was a very good horseman.
Yeah.
And we would groom them to within an inch of their life. They were strapped every day. I mean, it was really old-fashioned stuff. And I think it was a really good basis to go forward.
Yeah.
And I think that nowadays you don't see that so much. And that's mainly because of the economics of it.
Right.
I worked out that when I first started working with horses, I was doing 80 hours a week.
Wow.
And again, I'm not complaining about it because I loved it. I wouldn't have wanted it any other way.
No.
It was get up in the morning, get out, and we just worked all day, and we would finish late at night, and we would do that 7 days a week, and it was just great.
Yeah.
And I was earning £40 a week.
Yeah.
So I was earning 50 pence an hour, which even then wasn't very, it wasn't very much then.
No.
It really wasn't. But I didn't care. I mean, I carried on doing it. And so that's where the racing side really got to go from.
So presumably in the course of that time, you were more sort of jockey based, is that right?
I was riding point to points. I wasn't riding in point to points at that time.
Yeah.
But it developed into that where I was managing to find a few rides. But a lot of the parents at that time, sort of the more successful jockeys generally, they had parents who were very much involved.
Of course.
You had the Hickmans, the Hackings.
Yeah.
Tom Hills was riding at the time.
Yeah.
Fred French was riding. They were from real farming and point-to-point hunting backgrounds, whereas I wasn't. So I managed to start to get a few rides, but they were quite often the ones that the other people, no one else wanted to ride.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's you sort of think, oh, well, it doesn't matter, it's all a good experience. But actually, riding really bad horses, and they weren't all bad, but doesn't actually do you that many favours.
No.
Because you get into all sorts of bad habits. And it wasn't until I started to have a couple of my own pointers, and then I started to train them myself. And then I used to work them. I suddenly realised that I need to work them a bit harder than I'd been taught by Bob, really. Yeah. And I started to do a bit more, and then suddenly it all started to click, and I started to have a bit of success.
Wow.
And I had a friend called Stuart Adamson who'd worked for Peter Caslett at Fairlawn, Shibham. I don't really know of him, but Peter Caslett he trained for the Queen Mother.
Wow.
And was a very successful trainer. And Fairlawn is just the most beautiful estate. It still is. It's now owned by, I think, the Arabs. It's owned by, I think it was Khalid Abdullah, who I think he's died, but it still belongs to the family. There are no horses there, but it's just an amazing place. Every time I drive past it, I want to go in and have a look around, and I want to go and see the stables, the old stables. Yeah. But Stuart Adamson had worked for Peter Caslett for a while. Funny enough, he told me the funniest story, which I will tell you this story. He's passed away now. He died of cancer. But the Queen Mother used to go very regularly to Fairlawn, and she'd stay for the weekend.
Yeah.
And she would go down. I say I've seen the house, and I don't know exactly where the stables were, but I understand the stables were down the bottom of the hill. Yeah. And she was down in the stables, and one of Peter Caslett's kids, they had an old car that they used to drive around the estate, and suddenly this car comes flying down into the yard, and he jumps out of the car and he says, "Ma'am, breakfast is being served." And so she says, "Oh, okay." He opens the door. He's about 13 or 14. He opens the door to the car that he's driving, pulls the seat forward because it's only got 2 doors so she can get in the back. She gets in the back. He puts the seat back, shuts the door, and flies off back up the hill to take the Queen Mother for breakfast. It's just a brilliant story.
That is a great story.
And so Stuart said to me, I'll never forget, he watched me ride a few times and said, you sit well, you do everything right, but you're trying too hard. You've got to just relax.
Yeah.
You're concentrating, he said, on getting over the next jump. And you've got to start riding the race, not the next jump.
Yeah.
He said, ride on a much longer rein and don't move. He said, you've got 3 miles. He said, just sit still. Don't ask the horse to take off. Just squeeze into it, let it pop, and just sit still. And with that, it just suddenly started to change. I suddenly found, instead of having almost no time to think about what was happening in the races, I had all the time in the world.
Wow.
And I'd be going along and I'd be looking around and thinking, well, that one's going quite well, and I need to keep away from that one because that one's coming back. It's starting to get tired. I need to get out of its way. And suddenly you found yourself with an awful lot more time. And that just made a massive difference. Yeah. And then it developed from there, where I started to get a few people sending horses to me, and I was doing okay training point-to-pointers. And then I thought, I can't carry on race riding and training these point-to-pointers, because I had about 8 or 10, most of which were for other people. And I thought, if I fall off and hurt myself, which was fairly high chance I was going to, I wouldn't be able to train the horses, because it was only me and one girl who was working for me, exercising on the horses. So at that point I stopped riding. And then I was looking for a point-to-point jockey one day. I could not find one, and I don't know who told me, but someone said to me, "Oh, try this. Phone this lad from Josh Gifford's. His name was Pat O'Keefe. Said he's a really good amateur jockey." And I phoned him up, and he came and he literally turned up, rode in a race for me, and he was just poetry in motion compared to what most of the point-to-point jockeys were like. At the time, he was pretty much like a professional. I remember legging him up on the horse, and the first horse he rode for me, and his stirrups were so short, I thought, he'll never sit on this. And I told him what to do, and he completely ignored me. But the horse jumped beautifully, went beautifully. It ended up getting tired, literally coming into the last fence and finished second. But it was still a great ride, and it just made me realise that I did need to concentrate on what I could do and move forward. And that was at that time, a couple of the owners that I had said to me, "Why don't you take out a professional licence? You're doing okay pointing, but you could do it." And that's what I did.
Wow.
So, and at the time I was living at Woodchurch, and I decided that it was much too wet down there, a bit like here, I expect.
Yeah, it's very wet in the winter, and clay.
Yeah. So, in the winter, you couldn't go in the fields because you'd go in so far. I probably should have stayed at Woodchurch. I had 50 acres and nice place and nice buildings. I probably should have stayed there and spent the money putting an all-weather gallop in. And that would have worked, I think.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't have had the turnout in the winter, I suppose.
No.
But I decided I wanted to move up on the Downs, the North Downs, because I thought if I can find somewhere either just on top of the North Downs or just on the bottom, the ground is so much better. You can use it much all year round, pretty much.
Yeah.
And I found a place up at Hucking.
Yes.
Just sort of Detling, Hollingbourne area. And it didn't have much land with it. But at the time, Hughie Batchelor, who was a very big local farmer, quite a sad story because he was a character, shall I say, a bit eccentric. But he farmed an awful lot of land round there. And when farming was really good, the banks, which was Lloyd's Bank, were lending him money.
Yeah.
And they were saying, they would phone him up apparently and say, "There's a farm for sale. If you want to buy it, we'll support you. We'll back you." And they kept doing that. And he had an awful lot of land. And then they apparently, when things started to go bad, they phoned him up and said, "Right, we need our money back." And of course he couldn't get it. They made him bankrupt. And so a lot of the land round where I was had belonged to Hughie Batchelor.
Right.
It was bought by someone, I think, who was a director of Lloyd's Bank, who then sold it off in smaller parcels.
Yeah.
And one of my owners managed to buy a nice bit of land that we could put the gallop on, and that's where we got started with that, which was about half an hour's hack from the yard, which was perfect.
Yeah.
So we put a gallop in, and that was, I think we probably put the gallop in. I moved there I bought the place in 96. It wasn't finished till December 97 to actually move into the house, and did the stables first, of course.
Yeah.
But then I think we probably had the gallop put in around 98.
Yeah. So
when I went for my trainer's license, you had to apply for the trainer's license. When I first went, I had an interview up in London, the Jockey Club as it was then, and they didn't want to give me my license because they said I'd never worked for a professional trainer.
Of course.
And I said, well, the problem is that if I go and work for a professional trainer, what am I going to do with all the horses that I've currently got ready to become my first horses? And I think they reluctantly gave me the license.
Yeah.
I think they could see where I was coming from, so they gave me the license. And I got the license in January '97, and had my first winner in May '97, which was ridden by Pat O'Keefe, who I'd met through having the pointers, and he rode my first winner. He Golf Diamond, won at Fakenham.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, I made plenty of mistakes when I first started, because you had to have a minimum of 9 horses. So I had 9 horses, but only 3 of them were actually of any use whatsoever. And if I'd known then what I knew a few years later, I would have chucked 6 of them out in the field and just trained the 3.
Of course.
It would have saved me a fortune. I could have done a much better job and probably would have been more successful quicker, really.
Yeah.
So it was a real struggle, because you were trying to get owners, get horses, but we were sort of just ticking away and slowly doing a little bit better each year, really.
And how back then, coming into it, presumably coming into it from where you came from, and obviously them reluctant to give you a license, how nerve-wracking was that coming into it, when I'm sure around you were all these big names and big race yards, and then obviously you coming into it sort of with the background that you did initially? Was that quite nerve-wracking, and was that a big risk taken on your part?
It was nerve-wracking when I was going to races, because I didn't really know particularly what I was doing. And so I do understand why they were saying, you need to work for another trainer. I get that to a certain extent. But yeah, so it was nerve-wracking, and you see all these big names, but you just had to get on with it. And it became much less nerve-wracking fairly quickly. I mean, even the first time you tack a horse up to put for a jockey, you're tacking a horse up every single day, loads of them. But then you go and tack one up to go out in a race, and you're thinking, have I done it tight enough? Have I done it too tight?
Of course.
Is the bit in the right place? Have I done it too tight? Have I done it too loose? Should I put a noseband on? Should I have blinkers on? It's all these different things and going through your mind. But at the end of the day, you get on with it, and it works out.
I think sometimes as well, when you're backed into and faced with, this is the moment, I have to make this work, sometimes that's actually, in some cases, an enabler for success, because you've got no other option.
You're absolutely right there, because I think one of the main reasons I stuck with horses and being involved in horses is because I'd had to fight so much just to have a pony when I was a kid. To find to find the money to put shoes on the pony and things like that. I didn't have a clue what I was doing, and I didn't have the money. And my parents, I don't think they genuinely didn't have the money to be able to support me properly. So I'd work in the summer to make enough money. So when it came to the racing, I think there were some trainers some young trainers, I don't want to talk about names, but there was certainly some young trainers whose parents had sort of given them everything and provide them with the horses and a lot of the knowledge as well, and they'd been brought up in it. But it didn't actually matter whether they succeeded or failed.
Yeah.
Whereas I was either going to succeed or that would be it. It would be I'd be gone. And funny enough that these young trainers whose parents were right behind them, they didn't do anywhere near as well as I did.
No.
I'm not saying that. I'm thinking about a couple in particular.
No. Yeah.
That I thought, on paper they should have been streets ahead of me, and they were for the first 2 or 3 years, because I had 3 horses that were capable of going to the racetrack, and they probably had 25 or 30. But it didn't take very long before they gradually went down, and I was gradually going up, and it was sort of slowly changing. And then I think it was 1999 when someone said, "Oh, why don't you train some flat horses, not just have jumpers?" Because I was training jumpers purely because that's where I'd been involved with pointing, and it was just sort of the way I'd been going. And so I started to train the odd flat horse. There's a bloodstock agent, David Minton and Anthony Bromley. So David Minton, Anthony Bromley, I don't know who introduced me to them, but David Minton was an absolute genius as a bloodstock agent, and Anthony Bromley was, the two of them were working together. And I think David Minton put me on to Anthony Bromley because he was dealing with Nicky Henderson and some of the really big trainers, and Anthony was sort of dealing with younger trainers, and so he put me on to Anthony, and Anthony said to me, he said that we were talking about buying the odd flat horse, and he said, "I've always had a plan." He said, "No one will listen to me." He said, "But there's a selling race. So do you know what a selling race is?"
No.
Right. You have all sorts of different types of races, but a selling race is one where every horse in the race is for sale at a fixed price, apart from the winner, and the winner is sold at auction immediately after the race.
Okay.
And they used to have a race. The first flat meeting of the year was at Doncaster on the turf at the time. It was just all weather was just starting, so they were on the turf, Doncaster, and they had a 2-year-old selling race, and every year the horse that won it was sold for 20 grand or thereabouts, and all the others could be claimed for something like 5 or 6 grand, but no one ever claimed them.
Right.
So they only looked at the winner. So Anthony said to me, "Why don't we go there? We'll look at this race and we'll watch them in the paddock beforehand, so we're sort of trying to pick out the right one." He said, "My theory is," and he was absolutely right, is that to get a horse ready to run, that was sort of towards the end of March, a 2-year-old to run towards the end of March, it could not have missed any work, really. They needed to be in full work right up to that race. So you were pretty confident that they were sound and pretty straightforward.
Of course.
And we decided that we would look at all of the horses and sort of as if that we were going to an auction, a horse auction. And then we would buy not the winner, but we would choose one of the others.
Yeah.
So we did that. We all went our separate ways to watch the race, and then we came back together. There must have been an owner involved. I think it was an owner, me and Anthony. We all came back straight after the race and all decided on the same horse by chance, a horse called Santory Girl, which weirdly enough was trained by John Joe O'Neill, who was a jumps trainer and really had almost no flat horses at the time. He doesn't have many now, but he didn't have, I couldn't remember him having a flat runner before then.
No.
And this horse came out the stalls slow, didn't really know what was happening in the early part of the race, and then was staying on strongly towards the end and finished third.
Yeah.
And we all picked out the same horse, went and put the claim in for it, which is what you did. So you went into the weighing room, put a claim in, and we got her. And then she was my first flat winner. She dead heated. She won a race at Salisbury, beating a horse of John Dunlop's, owned by a big syndicate, and she beat it by just a hair's breadth.
Wow.
And and that was in 1999 was the first flat winner, and she ended up being a pretty good horse despite me. It was a completely different game training flat horses as well. It's all about handicap marks.
Right.
And it is to a certain extent over jumps, but it's not in quite the same way. You know, you could, if you've got a flat horse that's capable of running to a handicap mark determines how much weight they carry.
Yeah.
And the horses that go in, so there's different brackets of races. So you might have a 61 to 80.
Yeah.
And so if you're rated 80, you're carrying top weight. So and if you're rated 63, you're right at the bottom.
Okay.
And it's £1 pound in weight for every point. So really you need to make sure that you don't expose the horse fully in the qualifying races. Otherwise it becomes very difficult to win races.
Right.
Unless you've got one that's really good. And that's where you hear about people cheating and stopping horses to try and get a better handicap mark or to improve the betting for the next time they run.
Yeah.
And I didn't really understand that. And I wouldn't stop horses. But what I would do, and what I think is what a lot of people tend to do, is you run the horse over a distance that is too short for the horse. And so you're effectively handicapping it, but you're not actually physically stopping it. And I think that if you've got a horse in a race and you're physically restraining it right the way through the race, the horses get into bad habits. I think they need to understand that they need to fight for their position, especially towards the end. So if you run them over 7 furlongs, when you know that they're going to want 1.25 miles or 1.5 miles, even if they run well, you know you've got more to come going forward.
Yeah.
And at that time, when I had Santory Girl, I didn't have a clue what I was doing there with that. But you know, I learned as I went along.
Yeah.
And it was just good. It just kept on getting better. And then I realised that what was the point in training jumpers? Because I looked at it statistically. First of all, there was more prize money in flat racing. So there was a higher prize money.
Yeah.
The average flat horse ran twice as much as the average jumps horse because of injuries.
Yeah.
So statistically,
you
were going to win more money.
Absolutely.
You know, so if you're starting on a higher price anyway, value of races, you had to win more prize money, and you do.
Yeah.
There is no doubt. And that doesn't mean to say that people who have jumps horses don't make money or don't win big prize money. They do. But the day-to-day races, you'll win more if you're on the flat.
Yeah.
And so we just went more and more that way, really.
Yeah.
And started buying the horses. And I actually stopped using Anthony Bromley as my bloodstock agent, not because I didn't like him, not because I didn't think he did a great job, because I thought he was very talented. But the problem that I had was that he had bigger trainers than me that he was looking after.
Right.
So, and I was at the Doncaster sales one day, and this is when I realised, and I would go round and I would look at all the horses, choose which ones I'd liked, and then I'd compare them to what Anthony had chosen. And then we'd sort of collate a short list as to what we were going to buy. And so I said to him, right, he gave me his list, I think. And there was a horse on there that I really liked. He didn't have it on there. And I thought, I don't know why he hasn't got that one on there. So I said to him, have you looked at this lot number? And he said, oh yeah, no, I have looked at that. He said, but Alan King's buying that. So, and I get on well with Alan King, but Alan King was a bigger customer than me. I understand the situation. Yeah. So Alan King got first choice on that horse. And I wasn't in the equation for that horse. And I thought, well, hold on a minute. I picked the horse out. If I want to bid on it, I can bid on it. And then I actually think I started to back my own judgment as to what I liked. Because at the end of the day, when I was looking at horses with Anthony and we were working together, I was coming up with the same answers anyway.
Yeah.
So I knew what I wanted and I knew what I liked. And it was the same as what he wanted and he liked. So what was the point in paying him to do the job that I could do myself? And so I started to buy my own horses at that point.
So what when going to things like that and when looking out for horses, what is it specifically that you would look for?
I think anyone can look at a horse and decide whether it's right or not. It is the easiest job in the world.
Yeah.
The first bit. Because when the horse comes out of the stable and you look at it, you know immediately if you like it or not. You don't have to know anything about horses, because as soon as it walks out, even if you know nothing about horses, you'll look at it and go, that's a lovely looking horse. The reason it's a lovely looking horse is because its conformation is good, because the length of its back, everything's in proportion.
Yeah.
If it's an ugly horse, it's probably because it's got a really short neck and a really long back, or it's too long in the cannon bone, or there's something not right about it. You might not know what it is, but you do know that horse isn't right.
Yeah.
The next bit is the most important bit. And this is the bit that I think normal people who don't know enough about horses can make the mistake.
Yeah.
And the bit is then finding out if there's anything physically wrong with that horse, conformation wise, because you can stand and look at them and go, that's a lovely looking horse. But then when you stand in front of them and you might see that their knees are offset, or they're pigeon-toed, or their toes are either turned in or turned out, or one's turned in and one's turned out, you can't see that necessarily from the side, so they can look a lovely horse, but then you have to find the faults.
Yes, of course.
And that's the most important thing. And I think that if you buy a horse with good conformation, they stay sounder. You can train them harder. So if they're sound and you can train them hard, then you've got a real good chance of winning races. And the only other thing that I'm really looking for is their walk.
Yep.
The walk is the closest thing to a gallop because it's a 4-time movement. If a horse can't walk, it generally can't gallop.
Okay.
And when I mean can't walk, I don't mean it can't walk.
No.
I mean, when a horse walks, if they really use themselves, and so their shoulders are really swinging. And one of the old-fashioned things was they used to say you should buy a horse that when you watch it from behind, it swings its arse like a woman does. And that's the same thing. It's all the same because it means that they're flexible through their spine and they're taking a really long stride. So you have to put all of those things together. So if I was going to the sales and there'd be maybe normally 250 to 300 lots per day. Wow. I would probably I would have an initial look at, if there was 300, I'd probably have an initial look at 200. And of those 200, I would immediately whittle that down to 20. And from the 20, I would then go back and have another look at those 20 that were on my short list. And from those 20, I'd be down to 10. They would then get vetted, depending on what sort of money you're looking at spending. There's no, there was sometimes I wouldn't vet them, but if I could, I would. So then have them vetted. You might be bidding on 6 or 8 horses at a sale, 6 or 8 yearlings at a sale. And, when I was doing it, if I got 2 of those, I'd be delighted.
Yeah.
And I'd think I'd had a good day if I'd got to 2. And, so you'd be doing that over 2 days. And on the second day, you'd be already looking at the ones for the day after that. So you'd look at your 20, plus you would shortlist your next day.
Of course.
And so you're always working a day further on.
Yeah.
And at one point I was buying a lot of yearlings, and that's when we were really doing well. And I didn't worry too much about the pedigree because my theory was that if they were physically correct and they moved well and they had a pedigree, a really good pedigree, I couldn't afford them.
Right.
If they had a pedigree but their conformation was rubbish and they couldn't walk, I didn't want them.
Yeah.
So the only ones that I could really buy were the ones that didn't have the pedigree but had everything else going for them. And that's where we ended up buying some of the really good horses that I ended up buying. Funny, the first one that really started to hit the big time was actually bought by David Binton. And I wasn't even there at the sale. And he phoned me up and said, "I've bought this horse for you if you want it." So I said, "What is it?" And he said, "Well, it's a little filly," he said. He said, "It's not very big, but it's got a great walk." And he said, "It's physically, it's correct."
Yeah.
And I think it was 14,000. It's by Cape Cross, who was ended up being a very, very good sire. And so this horse turned up at the stables. Oh my goodness. he was right. It could walk. And there wasn't anything wrong with it.
No.
But it was tiny. It was absolutely tiny. It was, well, when we measured it, when it was racing, so when it was older, it was, I think it was 14.2 and a tiny bit. It wasn't even 14.3.
No.
It was, and I think if it had been going into a showing ring or something like that, or show jumping, they'd have easily got it under 14.2. It was tiny, and she was so narrow.
Yeah.
It was like both her front legs came out the same hole. But she walked unbelievable. The walk was just incredible. And she was correct. She was straight. It wasn't that she was offsetting her knees or everything was correct. But she was just tiny.
Yeah.
And so we took her to Windsor, I think, first. And she ran quite well. We were like, blimey, that was a bit better than expected for this little midget. And she just kept getting better. She won a race at Beverley.
Yeah.
Quite a 7. Beverley is a very stiff course, very tough course. 7 furlongs there, and she won there. And then she kept on improving, and she was, the big thing was we went to Newmarket on a Friday evening. I used to love Newmarket Friday evenings in the summer. It was just wonderful. I loved it. And we were really successful at those meetings on the July course. And we entered her in a 2-year-old conditions race. And there was, Michael Stout had a runner. I think it was Roger Charlton. So all big trainers, and there was one other, and then there was us. And I got Jamie Spencer to ride ours. I got on really well with Jamie, but he rode this horse, and I couldn't get any. I only had a few members of staff at the time, and I said, right, who wants to go to Newmarket on Friday? No one would go. No one wanted to go to Newmarket on the Friday evening. So I said, right, I'll do it myself then. So I drove the horse box up there, did it all. Luckily, my vet was up there. So I said to her, I'm there on my own, will you grab the saddle for me? Just bring it out. You can hold the horse, I'll chuck the saddle on, and then we'll be away. Okay. So we went into the paddock. Once we got it tacked up, I went into the paddock and thought, oh my goodness. There was these 3 strapping colts.
Yeah.
I mean, they were 16.2. They were big, strong, unbelievable. I mean, and someone said, oh, this is Michael Stout's best 2-year-old. And this is Roger Charlton, this is his best 2-year-old. And they were all raving about these 2-year-olds. And then I'm leading. Of course, I was bigger than most of the people leading up because I wasn't most of the people leading up at the races at flat horses are generally fairly small. Yeah. So not only made it look even worse because I was much bigger leading this little pony round the ring. And the stalls opened. And as the stalls opened, she tripped. And her head hit the ground. Jamie Spencer managed to stay on. I don't know how, because that really catches jockeys out if they trip as they come out the stalls. He managed to stay on. And anyway, she came back and she got herself up and went and won.
No.
And when she came, I ran out onto the course and Jamie's cantering back down. And he came back down to me And the first thing I did was take a big clump of mud and grass out of her mouth. Because when she'd hit the ground, she was parrot-mouthed as well.
Yeah.
A big clump of mud had gone into her, between her teeth. And she still had it at the finish.
Wow.
And and then she went on and she ran and won another race at Newmarket, a big handicap at Newmarket. We tried to sell her, couldn't sell her. And we ended up having to keep her. Thinking, oh, this is just a disaster. The following year, she ran at Goodwood in a listed race, and she won it. Well, she actually dead heated in the race.
Yeah.
And we won 25 grand. And the horse was owned. Dave Neverson was a friend of mine who was a professional gambler. And him and I got very involved, not from a gambling point of view, because I never bet.
No.
I just don't bet. And he used to bet, but he didn't used to bet on our horses. People used to think that all he was doing was backing our horses. He wasn't. He would back our horses if he thought they had a chance. It was nothing to do with, it was just, he was purely a form guy.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we've finished joint first, dead heat in this race, won 20 odd grand, and we owned half it. Dave and I owned half it, and the other half belonged to a small syndicate. 3 guys who, they each put in 7 grand to start off with. And they didn't have to put any more money in because they kept winning enough prize money. But anyway, we won 20 odd grand. And Dave said, I think we should supplement her for the Oaks. So when you enter the Oaks is the female equivalent of the Derby.
Yeah.
To enter those races, you have to enter them very early. They're not, most races you enter 5 days before.
Okay.
The big races you have to enter months before.
Of course.
And you can enter just before, but you have to pay a huge premium. The premium was 20 grand. So we had the money from winning this race, and he said, I think we should enter it. And I said, so we all agreed we'd enter it. So we end up going to Epsom the day before the Derby in the female equivalent. And again, you've got all these huge trainers. I think we were 33-1 in the race. And they set off and they turned the top of the hill to start to come down. And I thought, my God, she's really going well. And we also had George Baker was riding her, George Baker was the tallest jockey riding. He was 6 foot, riding a 14-2 pony. And anyway, they came. I was only watching our horse. But she was going very well as she turned the top of the hill. And I hadn't noticed that just behind Ryan Moore on one of Aidan O'Brien's horse called Alexandrova was actually going just as well, if not better. Anyway, so we started to make ground up down the outside. And then we hit the front, but Ryan was right with us at that point, and then he kicked away and won. But we finished a clear second. But inside the final furlong, she tripped again. This is not normal. She wasn't normally one to trip, but she tripped. I think it was just the undulations or something. Yeah, and nearly fell, and then got up and still finished second. She's just incredible. Wow. Incredible little pony. And we sold her after that. She was sold immediately after the Derby to an American. He was Japanese American. Gary Tanaka bought her. He paid $350,000 for her. Wow. We could have got $80,000 for her. about a year before, which we weren't prepared to take.
No.
We ended up getting 350,000 for her, and she won 100,000 for finishing second in the Oaks. And the owners that owned half of her,
Yeah.
they ended up with 3 horses of their own, and they raced for about another 8 or 9 years without ever putting more than their $7,000 in each that they started with. Because they had ended up getting another horse that was really good. We sold to Hong Kong. They paid, I think it was 25,000 for it. We ended up selling it for 100 and something. I can't remember the figure, but we sold that for them. And so they just kept on rolling this money over, and just had 8 or 9 years of so much fun with racing. And Gary Tanaka actually kept the horse with us. And she went on and she was third in the Irish Oaks. And she won the Park Hill Stakes, which is a big group 2 up. It was normally at Doncaster, but they were refurbing Doncaster, so it was at York that year. And again, she was so determined, the horse, because the day she won that race, she turned into the straight at York, and there was 2 horses in front of, there was more than 2 horses in front of her, but when she came to make a challenge, there was 2 horses, and there was the tiniest gap. And Martin Dwyer was riding her, and he went to go through this gap. And as he went through, the jockey on one of the horses was using his whip, and he hit her across the head. I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but as she was coming through, he picked his stick up and he hit her across the head. I don't think it was intentional. I think the gap was so small. Yeah, she was in a gap that no other horse could have fitted in. And Martin Dwyer said, she sort of, you could see it, you saw it in the video, she just sort of jinked her head back and then put her head back down and went even harder.
Wow.
And just ran through it. And the jockeys used to say she might not have been the best horse. She was a very good horse. She might not have been the best, but she was probably the bravest.
Yeah.
She was unreal for a horse of her size. And when she'd come back from the races, she would have her head would be almost on the floor, where she was so tired, where she'd given absolutely everything she could possibly give. And she went on, the following year she was 4th in the Coronation, which is another big race at Epsom, Group 1. Gary Tanaka decided that she should go to America and continue racing over there. Yeah. Which she went over, she had 2 or 3 runs there, but I think her body just couldn't cope anymore. And she was sold to Japan as a broodmare. And funnily enough, so that was when was she? She was 2006 when she was at her prime, I think. I think it was 2006 she was second in the Oaks. She's got a 2-year-old this year, which I can't remember the name of, in Japan. It is one of the best 2-year-olds in Japan this year. So
amazing.
She still could.
Yeah.
Mares don't normally produce, when they get really old, they sort of stop producing good horses. It's not always the case, but they don't produce their best offspring when they're 20. No. And she would have been, she was born in 2004, so she would have been she would have been 18, 19 when she produced this film. Yeah. And they're saying it's very, very good. We'll see. We'll see whether it does do it on the track. I don't know. It's been a very good 2-year-old, but they've got to become a very good old horse then.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, so then I think she changed things a lot, because then I did start to get owners prepared to spend a little bit more money.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my average purchase price was about 25 grand at that time for yearlings. But if you were comparing it to, I don't know, the big yards up in Newmarket, their average purchase price would probably be 200,000 when I was spending 25. Certainly in excess of 100, their average, for sure.
Wow.
But we came across some other really good horses, and I think the one that everyone knows about is Kingsgate Native.
Yes, I read about that one.
So I bought him at the sales. I paid 20,000 for him, and he. I'm trying to think he was a really chunky. He wasn't overly big, but he was very strong looking, even as a yearling, and I loved that about him. And when we started training him, he was okay. He had a bit of a choppy action.
Yeah.
But we were only cantering him until he was cantering, and then the first time we worked him, the first time we let him go, you suddenly saw a different horse. And it's not uncommon with sprinters that they're sort of, when they're going slowly, they don't have this great movement, but when they go fast, suddenly, whoosh, it comes. And it did with him. I mean, he was just like, he really took us back because he just flew. Wow. And I thought, we've got one here. We've definitely got one. And so we took it he went to York to run in a maiden at York for horses that had cost less than 20,000 or 25,000. And he's just going to turn up and win. I mean, it'll be easy.
Walking apart.
Yeah. And he got there, and it rained and rained and rained, and they called the meeting off. And we only had, I thought from as soon as we started working, I thought he's got to go to Royal Ascot. And this race was about 3 or 4 weeks before Royal Ascot. And I phoned the owner and I said, look, we've missed that race. We can't get another. If we run him again before Ascot, he won't go to Royal Ascot because it'll all happen too quickly for him. Especially first time. Once they're battle hardened, you can get away with it a bit more. But you wouldn't want to run a horse and then 2 weeks later be running it at Royal Ascot. So I said, you've got a choice really. We can either go straight to Royal Ascot, which people don't do, or we'll find another race for him and we'll just forget Ascot.
Yeah.
And he said, no, let's go to Ascot. So I said, okay, perfect. He had the right temperament for it, and we knew he was good. And he went to Ascot, and he should have won. He ran the Windsor Castle Stakes. He just should have won. He was coming down the wrong part of the track, and he was beaten a couple of inches into second. And it would have been a really big thing. I mean, it would have taken us... Finishing second made a big difference to us, but if we'd won that with a 2-year-old first time out, everyone would have said, oh my God, that's just such a training performance. But you get beaten that far and it's not the same. But anyway, we... So he then he ran at Glorious Goodwood in the Jim Crack. Not Jim Crack. Oh, what's the race called? I can't remember. We took him there for another big 2-year-old race. So the Windsor Castle is a listed race.
Yeah.
They go listed, Group 3, Group 2, Group 1. The race at Goodwood was a Group 2, I think. Yeah, Group 2. Windsor Castle was a listed race, but they're all the same horses running. It doesn't mean that much. And he came out the stalls, and George Baker was riding it. We were drawn right in the middle, which is the worst place you wanted to be, because which way do you go? You're going to be stuck on the outside, because they were going to split. It was a big field. You knew some were going to go one way, some were going to go the other. And so it came out. George went right, and half the horses went right, half the horses went left. And he got to about halfway, and he looked across, and the ones on the other side were in front. And he thought, I need to change. So he went from the right-hand side of the track, and he took a left turn and headed across. As he did, he hit a soft patch of ground that was right in the middle of the track, and you could see the horse sort of struggle through it. You don't get that too much, but that day there definitely was a patch that he hit. Went over onto the other side and got beaten a short head on a photo. And then you're sort of thinking, if George had come out and gone left instead of right, he'd have won. Yeah. For sure. So the first 2 races we should have won. Both of them. And I'd already entered him for the Nunthorpe. And when I entered him, and then I told the owner. I wouldn't normally do that, but John Mayne, who owned him, he was a form guy, but he didn't interfere with what I was doing at all. And he'd had some good horses before this. We'd done really well with him with horses before, so I think he believed I knew what I was doing. And I entered him in the Nunthorpe, which is a race for 2-year-olds and upwards. There are only 2 in the UK, I think, or is it one, or is that the only one? I think there is another one where 2-year-olds can run. But 2-year-olds do not run against old horses. They're just not good enough. They're just not. But I thought that he was, although he was a 2-year-old, he looked like a 4-year-old. He just did. And I thought, so I entered him. And then I told John Mayne, I think he was a bit pissed off with me to start off with. Then when we ran at Goodwood, he then looked at the Nunthorpe. And he phoned me up, he said, I've looked at this race. He said, I think we should go for it. He said, I think we've got a proper chance. So I said, great, lovely, let's go for it. And it had only been won once by a 2-year-old before, and that was 25 years previously. So we went there, and funny enough, I was in America buying horses. So I'd flown to America, and we couldn't find a TV to watch it. If you go to Keeneland sales, all the racing's on from all over the world. You can watch anything, anywhere. But we were in Ocala in Florida. Someone had told us, you go to Ocala, the horses are much cheaper there, and you'll get some nice horses cheaper, which is what we did. But we couldn't watch the race. So we ended up, there was the only other Irish person there was Con Barnan, who's a very good buyer of horses. He buys and sells, very, very good. And he had a horse he'd sold to Sheikh Mohammed running in the race. And so the 3 of us were sitting round a telephone with a loudspeaker on, listening to the Nunthorpe live. And when they said, Kingsgate Native has hit the front and he's going away, and he won it, and Dave Nevison and I were going mad. Dave and I were together, we were going mad. And Con Marlan's telling us, trying to shut us up to see where his horse came that he'd sold to Godolphin. I think it ended up finishing 5th or something. But no, it was just, I think this sale, I think they wondered what on earth was going wrong.
Yeah.
There was screaming and shouting from this office that they'd let us sit in while we listened to it. And then we'd virtually finished for the day. I don't know how, but we'd virtually finished for the day. And we went, Dave and I said, right, come on, let's go back to the hotel. We went back to this hotel. We were just staying in a normal hotel, but it had a swimming pool. We went and got our trunks, got in the swimming pool and ordered a bottle of champagne from the swimming pool. Just sit we were in the pool drinking champagne. And yeah, no, it was a great day. But in some ways I wish I'd been there for it.
Yeah.
It would have been lovely to have been there. And then he ran in the Prix de l'Abbé, which is on Arc Day. He finished second in that. Ground was very soft, and he was a little bit slow out of the stalls. Finished second in it, which is another great run. And then he was sold to Cheveley Park Stud. They paid £1 million. I bought him for 20. They paid £1 million for him.
Wow.
Plus 100,000 for every Group 1 he won the following year. And the agreement was that he could he could run for John Mayne for the following year, which is what he did. And we ended up winning the Diamond Jubilee Stakes at Ascot the following year, another Group 1. And again, I took a bit of a gamble because we ran him. I don't think we'd run him before Ascot. And we went there for the King's Stand, which is a 5 furlong race, but that was on the Tuesday, and also had him entered on the Saturday. And he ran in the King's Stand, and he ran too free. He just did too much early on, didn't finish the race off, and we were really disappointed. But John Mayne just wanted to run. It made no difference to him. You know, he was quids in already. But I had to talk to Cheveley Stud about it. And I said, look, if he comes out of this all right, I think we should potentially run again on Saturday. And again, people didn't do that sort of thing, especially if horse ran badly. If they've won, they want to run again, but they don't when they've run badly. And I said, I'm thinking this might just have got a bit of the fizz out of him, and we could be all right. So they said, Chris Richardson, who was the managing director of Cheveley Park Stud, phoned me up the next morning and said, how is he? I said, he's perfect, absolutely fine. He said, well, I've spoken to the Thompsons who own Cheveley Park Stud, and they said, if you want to run, you run. They said, the only thing is we'd like to change jockey. And I said, fine. And we ran and we won 66-1. And that year we ran in the Windsor Castle. I think we had 2 runners in the Windsor Castle. We finished 1st and 3rd in the Windsor Castle with 2 2-year-olds. And then we won that race on the Saturday. I think we were placed in a couple of other big races. Yeah. And I was the only trainer to beat me on prize money that year was Aidan O'Brien. I beat all the English trainers.
Amazing.
And it was a really good year. We had another runner. That year we had a horse that we really liked. We ran it at Salisbury. It won a maiden at Salisbury, Square Eddy. And he was a very special horse. So we decided to run him in the Coventry Stakes, which is the biggest race for 2-year-olds.
Yeah.
but he had sore shins before the race, coming up to the race. And we'd worked on them. And the owner was a chap called Dave Gorton, who was a big city guy, very, very wealthy. But he wouldn't have been the easiest person to train for. And I said to him, this horse is, I think we should run, but you've got to accept he's had sore shins, and I've been nursing him to try and get him there. And when they've got sore shins, it can come back very quickly. He finished mid-division in the Coventry, and he was so angry that the horse didn't win. He didn't come down to see us afterwards. And he also owned Flashman's Papers, who was running in the Windsor Castle, which was the last race on that same day. And so Flashman's Papers came into the paddock to parade. He didn't come down into the paddock. Nowhere to be seen. Nothing. You've got a runner at Royal Ascot, the second runner on the day at Royal Ascot, and you're not even down here. Didn't come down. And it won. He came down after then.
I bet.
He was straight down. And then Square Eddie ran in a listed race at Kempton and was just beaten from a very bad draw. And I had a friend in America who was a bloodstock agent in America, and he phoned me up, and he's Joe Miller, really lovely guy, and he phoned me up and he said, I think you should look at bringing that horse to America. He said, that'll win a big race over here. So I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, and you'll sell it for a lot of money. He said, why don't you enter it up? He said, I'll have a look through. And he phoned me up. He said, right, I found a race to enter it. It's a Group 1 at Keeneland. It's called the Futurity, Grade 1 Futurity. He said, run it in that. He said, well, enter it anyway. So I entered it. And I actually entered Flashman's Papers, Square Eddie, Mullion Mile an Hour, who was third in the Windsor Castle and would have beaten Flashman's Papers, but he was drawn on completely the wrong side of the track. He was a very good horse, but he couldn't keep him sound. But he, so I had three runners in that, and we entered them up. We ended up flying 5 horses over to America. 4 of them were running at that meeting. And we did get an offer for this horse that I bought for Dave Gorton. It was for me, it was a very expensive purchase. We paid $100,000 for it. And I said to him, oh, what would you accept? And he said, oh, I'd want $1 million for it. Anyway, so I got him $1 million for it. But the agreement was it was $1 million provided it arrives at Keeneland and races in that race.
Right.
It's got a race in the race for the new owner. But the flights, we got a flight. And I didn't deal with this, but we couldn't get a flight direct to Keeneland. We had to get a flight to New York. I think this is right. I might have the places wrong. We had to get a flight to New York. So we had 5 horses, flew to New York, and then we had to charter a plane to fly them to Keeneland because we couldn't get them there on time for the quarantine to do it all. And we had to get them there to get this £1 million deal done, or $1 million deal done. And we managed to charter this plane, but it could only take 4 horses, so it flew the 4 horses and one that wasn't running at that meeting went by road. And anyway, Square Eddie won the race, and Dave Gorton went mad, absolutely mad. Never should have sold the horse. Biggest mistake we've ever made.
Did he go on then to do very well?
2 weeks after that, he ran in the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah.
For the new trainer. I like to take the credit for it because you can't change a horse in 2 weeks. Yeah, he didn't make any difference to us in 2 weeks. He wouldn't have done hardly anything with it. Anyway, it ran there, but it got a hairline crack of its cannon bone in the race, or it appeared after the race. So it finished second in that. Which is a brilliant run. Ridden badly from what I could see. I thought it was a terrible ride, but it finished second. Got this hairline crack, and it took a long time before he came back. And he was trained by a bloke called Doug O'Neill, who I got on really well with, and he looked after horses for me. When I was sending, I didn't send many horses over there, it sounds like, but if I did send a horse over to America, it would be stabled with him, and I'd send a member of staff over, and that's what we did. But anyway, he had the horse, and he ended up being a good horse, but he was never quite the same. I don't think he ever won another Grade 1 after that. I think it was the only Grade 1 he won. And Kingsgate Native, actually going back, Kingsgate Native never won another Group 1. He won 2 for me. And then he went to Sir Michael Stout. He was good. He was due to go to stud. I didn't talk about that. He went to stud after all his exploits with me. But he ended up being infertile. So then he went back into training with Sir Michael Stout.
Yeah.
He won a Group 2 for Sir Michael Stout, but he could never win a Group 1. And then he went to Robert Cowell, and again carried on being a good horse, but never won a Group 1.
No.
But he was a proper legend, that horse. He really was. He ended up going to the British Racing School. Yeah. To teach some of the young riders. And apparently, he's still there as far as he's definitely still there. But if you got to ride Kingsgate Native, that was the pinnacle of going to the British Racing School for these young lads who were starting out, was to ride Kingsgate Native.
Amazing. So why would you say he never went to win another Group 1?
Well, I'd like to think it's because he wasn't trained as well.
I was thinking that.
No, I don't know, but it might. I would say when I had him, even though he was a colt, I had fields were set out, so I had all these, not pens, they were about half an acre.
Yeah.
So, and I had loads of these little half-acre paddocks, and they were all separated by about 10 foot between each one, 10 or 12 foot. So they were all individual, and we used to turn all of the colts, and everything used to go out. You couldn't turn them out otherwise. But my theory was that if you kept them turned out every day, I couldn't do it in the winter, but especially in the summer, you try and get them out for an hour or 2 hours a day, every day. Their mind was much better.
100%.
And the colts didn't think so much about what else they wanted to get up to if they were able to live a normal life as much as possible. And I think when they're trained in Newmarket, they don't have those sort of facilities.
No.
Very few trainers. They have a yard and they have the gallops. And they might have a little turnout pen. a Claydon one. But no, they would probably have one or two of those, but they wouldn't have the facilities to turn them out. Apart from maybe the really Godolphin or something like that, they wouldn't have the facilities to turn horses out. And even Godolphin, I don't think do. I think they send them away if they want them turned out and given a break.
Yeah.
But yeah, we used to turn them out all the time. Now, whether that made any difference, I don't know. But he did virtually run Sir Michael Stout over once at Royal Ascot. He was mucking about a bit, and Sir Michael Stout took him, and then as he went out onto the track, he sort of launched himself and virtually knocked him flying. But yeah, he was a special horse. But everyone says, "Oh, he was the best horse you ever trained." I don't think he was. He was the most successful horse I ever trained. He wasn't the best horse I ever trained. Because I think Mullion Mile an Hour was possibly the best horse I trained, but he didn't stay sound. He got a slab fracture of his knee, which didn't stop him. We managed to get him back, but it was always really tricky. He had some arthritic changes in his knee after that. But when he won his maiden, his first race, I mean, he didn't just win it; he just annihilated them.
Wow.
And then I had another really good horse called Inler.
Yeah.
That he won first time out as well. He was owned by Harry Findlay, who owned Denman, or half owned Denman. Was another big gambler, but he would gamble on anything. People think that if you train for gamblers, it means you're a gambling yard. It's just not the case. It's just, they might gamble on your horses, and they'll gamble on their own horses. And he definitely gambled in the first time it ran, because it went off at 6-4 favourite at Newmarket in a maiden, which was ridiculous, especially for a yard like ours to go off so short. And he did win. But, I mean, he was... I think he was going through a bad time with his gambling because he was offered 800,000 by Godolphin immediately after the race and turned it down. And he should have taken it every day. I paid 45,000 for that horse. I remember buying him. I absolutely loved him. And I didn't have the money to pay for it. I saw him go in. I loved him. I'd marked him off as one of the nicest ones I'd seen. And I bought him. And then Dave Neverson was with me, and Harry Findlay came over and he introduced me, and he said, "Oh, we've just bought a really lovely horse." And Harry came and looked at it and said, "I'll buy it off of you." And he bought it there and then. So he paid the 45,000. I didn't even end up having to pay it. But yeah, he was another very special horse. But you go through those sort of special horses, and it's all about keeping them sound.
Yeah.
You can. It doesn't matter how. And I always think it must be exactly the same with athletes. You think of someone like Mo Farah, who was just exceptional.
Yeah.
How many other Mo Farahs are there in the UK who couldn't actually train properly because their bodies wouldn't cope with it?
Yeah.
And I suspect for every one Mo Farah, there's probably another 50 that are just as talented, but their bodies can't cope.
Yeah, true.
The training, and same in football, every sport really. I'm sure there's so many talented people out there, but and that's the difference between the ones that hit the big time and stay there, and the ones that might win a race or two, but then like Mullion Mile an Hour, wins. He won that race. He was second to on a very, very good horse at Newmarket that became a quite a successful stallion,
Yeah.
and he was beaten in a photo by that. And again, that's the difference. You get beaten in a photo and you're nothing. But then when I think about all the horses I've had, I don't know if you know, we held the world record for the fastest ever race as well.
Really?
Yeah, I had a horse called Stoner Folker.
Yeah.
We started a syndicate when Folkestone Racecourse was still running, and
Yes.
so it was owned by the Folkestone Racecourse Owners Group. And Stoner Folker is Folkestone. That's what it was called. It's the Stone of Folker.
Yeah.
So, he became part of their group, and he was a very fast horse. He was placed twice at Royal Ascot, and then we took him to, I think it was the following year, he went to Epsom. And they have a race there called the Dash, which is 5 furlong race. But Epsom is, the Dash, a lot of it is downhill. Then the last bit is uphill. And you have to be drawn high. So you want to be drawn right on the stand side. We were drawn in stall 3, I think. It was terrible. But he came out, he was so fast out the stalls, this horse. He used to sort of almost wheel spin as he came out the stalls if he didn't get the right grip. And he came out the stalls, Luke Morris rode him, and he sort of gradually moved over towards the stand side as he went through the race, and ended up winning it at a time of 53.69, which is still a world record.
Wow.
Over 5 furlongs. I mean, you can say, he's the fastest horse. He's not the fastest horse in the world, because if you'd run a better horse on that same day, on that same track, he'd have been beaten. It just so happened that no other horse has gone faster. So he does hold it, but
amazing.
Yeah, it was an incredible win, and to do it in the fastest time. So he's in the Guinness Book of World Records.
Wow.
He recognised it all.
That is amazing. So a question I have sort of listening, and something that I sort of knew of but didn't quite realise or didn't know fully how it worked. So explain the dynamic between the owners of the horse, I guess, is equally the person who fronts the money initially for the horse. And then there's obviously you being the trainer.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work in terms of, because I didn't realise the dynamic between, there was a difference, owner, trainer, and then is there someone else that's involved?
No, owner, trainer, jockey.
Owner, trainer, jockey.
Yeah.
Okay, and why is there a difference between owner and trainer? Could you not do both of those things?
I could, yeah.
And have you?
Yeah. No, I've had some good horses myself.
Yeah.
But I end up telling them, that as a trainer, it's very difficult to make money just on training.
Okay. Got you.
Very difficult. I mean, the top guys are different.
Yeah.
They can charge so much money
to train just train.
They can do it without having to worry about it. But when you're in Kent and you're training horses, you can't charge the same as these top trainers are charging in Newmarket, because people just won't come to you.
No,
they just won't. I mean, you might get some, but yes, I had horses. I had one that quite a funny story. I bought a horse in Ocala at the sales there, which I was saying about in Florida. I bought a load of foals. That's what I did. I knew nothing about buying foals. It's a completely different game to buying yearlings.
Yeah.
Completely different. Because you've got to be able to envisage what's going to happen to them over that following 12 months.
Yeah.
But again, if you buy at the right price, it doesn't actually matter too much. You've got to, it's just all a scale of right. And, so I always used to say, if I buy 10 yearlings,
Yeah.
one of them will be very good.
Yeah.
And then the others will vary. And I had the statistics all worked out as to, you get out of 10 that I bought, I would expect to get one really good one, 4 that were pretty good. Then there'd be 1 or 2, normally only 1, was absolutely useless or lame. And then the others would just be pretty low stuff. But I'm not saying they wouldn't win races, but they wouldn't be very good. And I always thought if I bought foals, the statistics would just be, instead of getting 1 out of 10, I'd probably get 1 out of 15 or 1 out of 20 that would be really good. And that's pretty much how it worked out.
Yeah.
But I bought one from a pretty unknown sire in Ocala who never even made it. I think this horse was probably the best one that it produced at the end of the day. And I ran it. I couldn't sell it. No one wanted to buy it. I don't know why. Probably because it had no pedigree.
Yeah.
And no one had ever heard of the sire. And so I ran it a couple of times, and then it won quite a nice race. And an owner who wasn't an owner of mine, but who I knew a bit and had spoken to, he phoned me up and he said, that horse, would you sell it? He said, it belongs to you, doesn't it? I said, yeah, I would sell it. So he said, how much do you want for it? I don't want to say the name, because if this gets heard by certain people, it's going to could cause a bit of trouble. Not trouble, but I said, I think the figure was 30,000. I said, I want 30,000 for it. And he said, okay, I'll speak to my advisor. And I thought, you've got an advisor? He just ran a small syndicate. So it was one of the syndicate members, I found out afterwards, who knew nothing about horses. I mean, just nothing. But he used to think he knew everything. And he came back to me and he said, I've spoken to my advisor, and he says that you're asking too much money for that horse. It's not worth 30,000. So I said, that's fine, don't buy it then. So he said, okay. That was it. Next time out, and we got it in a better race at Newbury, big race, lots of runners, wins again. Get the phone call again. See that horse won again? So I said, yeah. He said, is it still for sale? I said, yes. He said, is it the same price? I said, no. So he said, how much is it now? I said, it's 45,000 now. So he said, I'll speak to my advisor and come back to you. He came back. He said, I've spoken to my advisor. He says it's too much. I said, that's fine. Don't buy it then. So he said, okay. I said, I'll tell you what. I said, why don't you, if you're interested, buy half of it and I'll keep half of it. And he said, would you? I said, yeah. So he bought half of it based on 45,000. And it ended up, I did work it out at the time, it was quite a few years ago now. I think they ended up, every time it won, they asked if they could buy a bit more, and I'd put the price up. And I think the last price they paid was based on a value of about 90,000. I did so well out of the horse. It was, and I don't think I made fortunes out of horses, because I lost a lot of money as well. When things went wrong, I lost fortunes. But, I did really well on that horse. And he ended up finishing, I think he was third in the Jersey States at Royal Ascot. So he was a good horse. Yeah. But just when people start to think they know about, and I don't think I've ever been like that. I've always been, it's like when I I had if you have problems with horses going in the starting stalls and things like that, I used to get Gary Witherford, who's used to come out and help me to sort it out. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Why am I... The most important part for putting a horse in the stalls is the very first time they go in.
Right.
Yeah. So why am I trying to do it, which I can do most of the horses absolutely fine, but you've got an expert who all he does is stalls work, him and his son, Craig.
Yeah.
They've gone there. Gary's packed up now, but Craig still does it. And Craig did all my horses right to the finish. Put every horse that went in the stalls, first time he put it in. Because he would come down and I'd say, right, I've got 10 to go through the stalls, come down and put them in. He'd put all 10 in one morning, and they had the best possible education. And when I had jumpers, I used to do the same with the jumpers. I could teach a horse to jump, but I used to send the horses to Yogi Bresner. Do you know, he was the chef de keep of the British Olympic eventing team. Absolute genius with horses, teaching them to jump.
Yeah.
So I used to send them all to him for a week. And they would come back, and I'd know that when they went into a fence on the racetrack, if they were wrong, they could shorten, they could pop, they could stand off, they could do everything.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to say that they never fell, but it meant that they had a lot less fallers than horses that weren't given that start in life.
Yeah.
And so I always follow that philosophy. You try and get as much information and help from whether it's vets, whether it's bloodstock agents, whether it's owners. It can be anyone. It doesn't even need to be about racing. It can be about, sometimes an owner will think outside the box about something that you're sort of a bit blinkered in what you think, and they think different because they come from a different industry, and it can help. But this guy thought he knew everything, and he'd never trained a horse in his life. He didn't know anything about. He was just a small-time gambler. I don't think he wasn't even a big gambler. He wasn't. Yeah. He wasn't a successful, like Dave Neveson and Harry Finley as well. And Dave Neveson was an absolute genius with form. Yeah. I mean, he knew every single horse. He didn't even need to look them up. He was so focused on what he was doing when he was gambling. He could look at the racing post, look down the names of the horses, and he would say, definitely got a chance in that race. And then you'd look at another one and go, forget that, you can't beat those. There's 2 or 3 in there that you can't beat. And he would know straight away without even looking at the form. But what mucked him up, there's 2 things that mucked him up. Women was one, because he used to spend so much time studying the form and looking at horses and trying to work out what was happening. He was brilliant, but he was a proper. When he was playing, and he was just brilliant fun. But he got involved with this girl, and he got totally obsessed by her. And I think he took his mind off what was most important, the hours he used to spend. He wasn't spending the same amount of hours. And at the same time, Betfair, the betting exchange, came out or was just starting. Do you understand? You know about Betfair?
A little.
Yeah, so normally you go to a bookmaker and you have your £10 on, and you have a bet, and they give you 3 to 1, you get your £30 back plus your £10. Yeah. With Betfair, it's all online, and I could say I think this horse should be 10 to 1, and you might think, I think it should only be 5 to 1. So you would back it with me. So all it is He's
Yeah.
joining two forces up together who are not necessarily bookmakers. And when Betfair first came out, it was people thinking, like the expert I'm talking about,
Yeah.
he would go on there and go, oh, that horse should be this price. And, you know, and Dave Neverson was like making so much money because he was better than them,
Right.
much better. And he used to work on, it was a 15% margin. So he was gambling huge amounts of money, not on, you know, over the period of a month.
Yeah.
And sometimes he'd back 2 or 3 horses in a race. But if they needed to be 15% above the price he thought they should be. So
Yeah.
if he thought they were 10 to 1 and they were 12 to 1, he'd back them.
Yeah.
And if they were 12 to 1 and he thought they should be 14 to 1, he wouldn't touch them. And that was his system. So he was working on a 15% margin.
Yeah.
And his view was that if he was 5% wrong, he was still making 10% on his money.
Right.
At one stage, he was gambling 300,000 a month. So he was making 30 grand a month purely in gambling, and he did it for, I think, 20, 25 years.
Wow.
And I'm not saying he probably didn't start at that level, but that's where he finished. He was gambling like 300,000 a month. And he was doing really well. And then Betfair came along and the margins went bigger because you had all these mug punters who thought they knew what they were doing gambling. But what happened very quickly was that the bookmakers realised as well what was happening. And the bookmakers got on and the margins went whoosh, and they shrunk to almost zero. And suddenly, if Dave was 5% wrong, he was losing 15 grand.
Yeah.
And, you know, as much as he was gambling in huge amounts, you can't keep losing.
No.
And suddenly it all went very wrong for him and it was all because of the margins, well, the women as well, but the margins on Betfair,
Yeah.
I think, was his main problem. He couldn't make the margins, but I remember him coming up to the yard one day saying, look, I need some help with this. This is when Betfair first came out. He said, you could do it. He said, you could just sit in front of the computer in the afternoon and I'll tell you what prices to back these horses at. And when it's at that price, you press the button. And when it's at another price, you press the button. And he said, I'll make loads of money. And he did for a while.
Yeah. Wow.
But yes. But then one thing I haven't talked about is, I don't think have you know about St Moritz?
No.
Yeah, and I had some horses, and you know, I had quite a few horses, and Steve Drown used to ride a few for us.
Yeah.
You know, I got on with most of the jockeys really well. I did. And I also got on really well with the press and people like that. They were a lot of people were very kind to me.
Yeah.
I remember ran this horse at Kempton or somewhere, and Steve said, "Oh, you should take this horse to St Moritz." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Oh, they race on a frozen lake in February." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "You'll love it." He said, "You'll love it." I said, "What?" And so I started asking this question. I said, "What?" And he said, "Just go and try it. Just go and try it." And I think it was, I want to say 2007, we took our first horse over there.
I think it was actually. I think this was briefly in my research, but I didn't realise it was a frozen lake.
Right. So went over there in 2007. I think we won a race the first year. And I got hooked by it, and I went pretty much every year after that. There was a few years we missed, maybe we didn't have quite the right horses for it. But everyone thinks, it's a frozen lake. It's not really, well, it is a frozen lake, but there's snow on top of it.
Right.
And it's not like snow we get over here, because the snow that you get in these places is dry.
Okay.
So where it balls up if you ride a horse in snow in this country, they just, within a few minutes, they're like, looks like they've got stilts where they're standing, and it just all balls up. And that's because the snow's so wet, it binds together. When it's really cold in St Moritz, you try and make a snowball is nearly impossible, because you pack it together and just throw it, and it's a powder. So yes, they're racing on a frozen lake, but there's snow on top of that. So they're racing on snow, and it's prepared like they would a ski surface. So if you go skiing and they're preparing the piste, they have the piste bashers, and that's exactly what they do. And when the weather's really cold, you can hear the ice going because it's very brittle. The colder it is, the harder it is. And it's good. It's not a bad thing. But over the years, since 2007, I've seen a massive difference in the weather out in St Moritz.
Yeah.
Massive. I'm not saying I didn't believe in global warming, but I wasn't. I thought, they're exaggerating it all. It's not exaggerated at all. When I first was going to St Moritz, every year, there are 3 Sundays in February, consecutive Sundays, and we'd go over and there'd be snow everywhere and the sun, and it would be -5 or 10 during the day, and at night it'd be -20. But it's a dry cold. Do you ski?
Yeah.
So you know what I mean.
Yeah, and interestingly, that's the similar decline that I've seen is, the mountains now don't have the snow that they ever used to.
No.
At all. Down below is near non-existent, whereas when we used to go as kids, it was everywhere.
Yes.
And it's very sad.
Yeah. Now, when you go, if you go to St Moritz, I mean, I'm not saying don't have snow in the village, but most of the time the roads, you can see the tarmac nearly all the time. It's very rare that you go over now and there's packed snow on the roads.
Yeah.
And if there is, it's gone within 2 or 3 days. Whereas when I was first going to St Moritz, I mean, it was an adventure driving up there.
Yeah.
I mean, that was part of the fun of it all, driving up there, and you'd be on this packed snow. So I've seen a huge difference. And, in the last few years, you're going over there thinking, is it going to be on or not? And things like that. And it's literally, they had the last weekend this Sunday just gone.
Yeah.
And although it went ahead and the track seemed to ride okay, or ride well, I think, they'd had to section off, they'd had to move the rails on quite a lot of the course to keep them off of certain areas. But they never had to do that in 2007. No. I mean, the thing that would stop them before was possibly too much snow. Whereas now it's because the temperature's not being cold enough, or they get a massive variation of temperature.
Yeah.
Because I was there, and George Baker had a terrible accident out there. And I've been going for years. It's the only accident I've ever seen. And so I wouldn't say that means people shouldn't run. At the time, everyone's going, it's dangerous, it's dangerous. Freddie Talitsky had a terrible accident at Kempton. They didn't say, it's dangerous at Kempton, close the track.
Yeah.
It happens. It can happen anywhere. But on the day that George had his accident was caused by global warming, I think. I can't say I'm 100% right, but what had happened was that they'd had a crack in the ice inside the track, not on the actual racetrack, on further in from the racetrack, and the water had come up through the crack and then gone across onto the racetrack.
Yeah.
And it was sitting, the water was sitting between the ice that was already there and the snow that was on top.
Yeah.
So when George's horse put its foot down, it was almost like an oil between the two layers, and that caused the horse to slip and fall, and then George got hurt. And I was there with him virtually the whole time he was on the ground till he was airlifted away. And it was horrible to be there for it. I'm glad I was there for it. Not glad I was there for it. I was glad I was there for George.
Yeah.
Because I was the only English-speaking one. Well, they all speak English, but I was talking to him the whole time, even though I don't think he knew where he was or what was happening.
No.
You know, I thought it was important that I stayed by him and kept talking to him all the time.
Yeah.
And I haven't actually talked to him to find out whether he probably wouldn't even remember, even if he could hear me, he wouldn't have remembered of it. But yeah, that sort of thing never happened. And I think, this year, the first meeting they had to cancel because they'd had some problems with water coming up. Then they had the two other meetings with the track was okay, but they had to section a bit off, and it just became more and more difficult. But we had, I don't know whether, I haven't talked to them out there, but Ferrari was, if he wasn't the best horse that ever ran in St Moritz, he was one of the best for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times he ran. He must have run 15 times out there. I think he won 5.
Yeah.
And he was placed in most of the others.
Wow.
And he won the biggest race they have out there is the Grand Prix, which is the big one. That's the one you really need to win. It's which is about £50,000 to the winner.
Yeah.
And we won that with him, which was that was the one we always wanted to win.
Yeah.
And he'd won so many races, but they get some really good horses out there to try and win these races. People take really top-class horses out there. But it's such a spectacle.
Yeah.
Of the people who go skiing, they understand it.
Yeah.
People who don't go skiing, I think they sort of think, that's a bit odd. Why would you do that? But, the stables are all heated. So the horses are all kept very warm. We have there's a little training track, and then provided this race course is okay, you're allowed to go out and you go on the race course a bit as well. And
Wow.
It's just the most amazing place. And I've made some amazing friends from going out there. Some really good friends. And I think if there's not many, as much as with everything I've done and in racing and stuff, I'm not actually a particularly confident person. I find it almost a bit embarrassing, but I'm not the sort of person that would, if I was hungry, go into a pub and have something to eat on my own.
Right.
I'd rather go into a takeaway and sit in the car and eat it on my own rather than sit in a pub on my own. And I think that sounds stupid and a bit weird, but I
know what you mean.
But I could go to St Moritz. If I got in the car and drove there this evening and got there tomorrow morning, I could go out and see people every day, different people for a week, and have just a wonderful time on my own. I'd rather do it with someone else. I'm not saying I would want to do that on my own, but I could do.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be I wouldn't be on my own. I'd be with people all the time out there. It's just, if someone said, well, you can live anywhere in the world, I would have to live here because of family and things like that. But if I was totally on my own and they said you can live anywhere in the world, that was where I would live.
Really?
It's
worth a visit.
If you've not been there, it's not just about. Well, if you're interested in horses and racing, it has to be on your bucket list, and you need to be on your bucket list soon because it might not be around for that much longer.
No,
if things don't change. But it's not just that. So they had the racing. I'm not sure when it starts. It might have already started. But this week, so before this, they have polo on the lake. They have cricket on the lake.
Wow.
Then they have the racing, and then they have classic cars on the lake. And I think that's just started.
Wow.
But it might be next weekend. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
But I have never been for that. I'd love to go for that because you're not talking about, there might be an E-type Jag out there, but you're talking about Ferraris, and Lamborghinis, and really, really special cars.
Wow.
Millions and millions of pounds for the cars, and they're driving round, skidding round the corners.
Amazing.
And I've not been to it, but I would love to go to it. And you go there in the summer as well, and it's just such a beautiful place. I went there in the summer for a meeting about white turf in St Moritz, and there was a Ferrari had something on there, and there was this marquee up outside the most expensive hotel in St Moritz, and they had all these old Formula One cars in there, really old ones. It was just beautiful. But it's ski resorts are just as beautiful in the summer as they are in the winter. Just different, that's all. Just different.
Wow. I wish we had the screen up and running. We could have pulled it up and given people a live show, because I'm definitely gonna get on the YouTube when I get in and have a look at that.
Yeah, if you put Ferrari, white turf St Moritz, it'll come up with his race. Yeah, and it's commentated by a British commentator for that race, because that year they were screening it live all over on YouTube. They still do. Yeah. But that year, we brought in some British people to do it, British TV people. Yeah. And Mike Catamol does the commentary on it. Yeah. I was really pleased because they said to me, who can we get to do the commentary? I said, Mike Catamol, get him over. He'll love it and he'll be great. And he was just brilliant.
Wow. So in all the places, because did I read you've been and raced over in Dubai as well?
Yeah, I had winner on the first night of the Meydan racetrack. First, because they had another racetrack there. Just surface wasn't anywhere near as nice, and it was still amazing compared to places over here. And I think we'd had one or two horses over there. And then we went over when Meydan was just built. We had a winner on the first night. That's. I love Dubai as well. Yeah, I absolutely love it. I mean, I've been really lucky like that because I've had quite a few runners in America over the years. Not huge amounts, but for a small trainer, I've had quite a few. France, Sweden. Wow. We took a couple to Sweden. obviously Switzerland, Germany, Dubai. I mean, there's other places I'd have loved to have gone.
Yeah. Are there any key differences between the way that they do things in either country, or is it fairly across the board similar?
It's fairly similar across the board. Yeah. I mean, the one thing is with the French racing is a bit frustrating because you can't run off of your English handicap mark in France.
Okay.
So the French try to make it as difficult as possible for us.
Right.
And they just do. It's not reciprocal. It's not, we'll do this for you and you do this for us. They just try to make it difficult for us.
Yeah.
As difficult as they possibly can, which makes it not impossible to go there because the prize money is so much better.
Is it?
Yeah, one of the problems in racing in this country, we've got bookmakers and then we've got what was the Tote. It's still called the Tote, but it's owned by bookmakers now. But so you've got different people taking bits out of it. So Ladbrokes and all these bookmakers are taking money out. And then there's quite big independent people taking money out as well.
Yeah.
And I might have the figures slightly wrong, but I don't think so. This was some time ago. I was on one of the committees for race planning and things like that with the Jockey Club. So I was representing the trainers with a couple of others. And we were getting, for prize money at that time, I think it was 100 million a year from the bookmakers.
Right.
Now in France, they don't have bookmakers. Everything is effectively, it's called the pari-mutuel, but it's a tote monopoly. So it's a pool betting system and it's all run by racing.
Okay.
There's advantages and disadvantages to that.
Yeah.
But the main advantage to it is when we were getting 100 million from betting, they were getting 850 million euros from betting. So the prize money is in a different league to what we get.
Yeah.
Here. You know, if you've got a moderate horse, you're going to win £4,000 or £5,000 a race, maybe, say 4,000 a race. So if you win 3 races, you've won 12 grand. That doesn't keep a horse for even for a year.
No.
Nowhere near in racing.
No.
If you run a horse, if you've got a horse in France, if it's a French bred, you get 60% extra. And most win prize money is, I think that there's not many that are lower than 10,000 euros to the winner. So if you've got a French bred, you win 16,000 in one race.
Right.
So if you win a race in France and get placed a couple of times, you can probably cover your training fees for the year. In this country, you win 3 or 4 races, unless it's a good horse, you're not going to cover your training fees.
No. Big difference.
Yeah.
But they make it difficult for you.
They do make it difficult. You know, if you run in France, you have to run, getting a handicap mark, and most horses, it's something like 98% of horses, racehorses, are handicappers. It's only 2% that are running in group and listed races. So they're running in conditions races, we call them, where they're running off of the same mark, same weight. So the Nunthorpe races like that we're talking about, they're all running off the same weight. They might have concessions for age or gender, but pretty much they're running off the same weight. So you have to run 3 times in this country to get a handicap mark. If you go to France, pretty much the same. I think there's some slight difference in the rules, but basically 3 times to get a handicap mark. If you run a horse 3 times in France, you've got a handicap mark. If you run it once, if you bring it back home and run it once in the UK,
you have to do the 3 again.
No, you have to do 1 again.
Okay.
You've got to run in a conditions race again to get your handicap mark back. But especially nowadays, with Brexit, taking a horse to France before was relatively easy. But the cost now of taking a horse to France might be, I haven't done it since Brexit, but when I used to drive over there, I would say with overnight accommodation, everything else, maybe £1,000. And the getting on the train and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Now it's probably more like £3,000. So you're going over there to run a horse in a conditions race that it can't win, probably can't even get placed in, and it's costing you £3,000, and owners won't stand it.
No.
So it's just made more difficult. And the French don't play by the rules either, because they're meant to treat everyone equally, when we were in Europe. But they pay, the French trainers get travel expenses for their horses to get to the races.
Right.
And one of the things that I heard was that by law, if they're giving them money, they should be giving us money, certainly from Calais, to get to wherever we're going.
Yes.
Because otherwise it's not a fair playing field.
No. But they weren't.
And I mean, they just won't.
No.
They just won't.
No. Especially not now.
No, even more so now. But they wouldn't even then. I mean, they didn't want us to go.
No.
They want to keep the money within their own, and I understand that. But it didn't work. Didn't work the other way round. In the UK, we welcome them with open arms and say, oh, well, it's good for the sport because it's good to see foreign horses coming in. It's the same when you go to St Moritz. They really want foreign horses to go because it makes it an international event.
And undoubtedly brings more money into the sport.
Yeah. But the French don't quite want it like that.
No. So what makes a good jockey? And by the sounds of it, you haven't had much choice on certain aspects of who's being the jockey on some of your...
No, generally I would make the decision, or I would make the decision with the owners. The problem you've got is if you haven't got enough horses to have your own jockey, then you end up having to use whoever is available.
Okay.
That didn't really cause any major problems.
No.
In fact, in some ways, I think it might have been slightly better because I did have my own stable jockey at times, sort of lesser jockeys, but I had a jockey. My main jockey I had in all the time I was training, who was with me the most and the longest, was Kieran Fox. Who was a good jockey. He was okay, but he wasn't as good as some of the really good ones. And he was, I think the difference between them is that the really good ones are ultra consistent. They make very few mistakes. So Ryan Moore, probably the best in the world at the moment, but certainly right up there. If he rides 70% of his races perfectly, and then you would have someone like Kieran Fox. I might have the figures wrong, but maybe he's riding 55% of his races perfectly. But that makes a huge difference. And the problem with having your own jockey is that they expect to ride every single horse that you run.
Mm-hmm.
And if an owner, if they ride one bad race,
Yeah.
the owner says, "Oh, well, I don't want him riding my horse next time.
Of course.
I want so and so." Then you end up getting another jockey to ride the horse, and then your jockey has got the right. He's completely demoralised. Then he doesn't ride as well because he's not feeling great. It's just the same as putting them on the subs bench in football or whatever. You know, they get demoralised. They don't want to play properly, and it's exactly what happens. So in some ways, it's an advantage to have the jockey in the yard, but in other ways, I think there's an advantage to not having a jockey and using the best available on each day. And also it means you can choose which jockeys are more suited to specific horses.
Of course.
You know, there's Luke Morris, but two sort of contrasting jockeys, Luke Morris and Rob Havlin, who I used, both of them I used quite a lot over the years. And Luke Morris, perfect jockey for something that's a little bit lazy. I don't want to give up on. I want someone to drive it all the way to the line, and I want them to really be quite hard on the horse. But if you said that to, so if you put him on one that you want, someone needs to sit really quietly and still and cajole it along, he can't do it.
Yeah.
And then you've got Rab is exactly the same, but the other way round. I mean, if you said to him, right, you know, make sure you get this towards the front.
Yeah.
If it came out the stall's a bit slow, he'd go, "Oh, sorry, it came out a bit slow. I ended up towards the back." Yeah, well, why didn't you make up a bit of ground there and there? Well, no. Well, that's where I was.
Yeah.
You know, so there was. I've made mistake. Luke's ridden horses for me, and I thought, "Oh, why did I put him on that?" I knew he was going to do that. Like I was saying earlier about having the 3 runs to get a handicap mark, and it would be the 3rd run, and I wouldn't be stopping it. But on the other hand, you don't want it being given an absolute beating, beating, but you don't want it given a really hard ride to finish a close-up 5th. If you're going to finish 5th, you might as well finish 7th, and the horse hasn't had a really hard time.
Yeah.
In which case you can run it again quicker. It's got a better handicap mark, and everything's rosy. But with Luke, he tries so hard on every single horse he rides that sometimes there was one horse that I had a proper plan for it, and it was going to have 3 runs, and then I'd found a race for it which was over a lot further distance, and it had 2 runs, and it was going to be, the handicap was going to rate it around 55, which is low, but it's manageable. And I knew that when I stepped it up in trip, it was going to be about a 70 or maybe a bit more. Absolutely ideal to win a few races. So I found a maiden handicap. This is quite a rare race. A 0 to 60 maiden handicap.
Yeah.
It had had 2 runs. It was going to be rated around 55. Luke was on it for the 3rd run. And I said to him, just go out, teach it a bit, do the best you can, but don't be knocking it about too much. Because horses think about it as well. As much as you want them to be pushed all the way to the line, in their early runs, if you give them a real hard time, they tend to resent it.
Yeah.
So they've got to enjoy it first. Then you can push them a little bit harder. Anyway, he rode this horse. and he went down the back straight, and he was still going well. And I could almost read his mind. He was thinking, "I've got a chance here. Right, I'm going for it." And he absolutely threw the kitchen sink at this horse and ended up finishing third, which was no good to anyone. And instead of getting a mark of 60, we got a mark of 70.
Yeah.
Which meant we couldn't run in the race we were going to run in.
No.
And that horse never won a race. Never won. And it should have won at least one race. I mean, maybe it wasn't a superstar. Maybe it wasn't going to go and become a good horse. But I think that he just gave that horse too hard a time when it shouldn't have been given such a hard time. He's a great jockey.
Yeah.
But he wasn't the right horse for that horse on that day.
Yeah. I know what you mean. So is there anything you would say for anyone aspiring to do what you do, or anyone growing up thinking that that's perhaps on the cards sort of for them in the future?
Yeah, no, I think if anyone wanted to do it, I would absolutely not put them off. I would say that it's become more difficult.
Yeah.
Than it was. Yeah, you can't buy a horse for 20,000 now. You can, but a lot less of them are any good.
Yeah.
And I mean, if someone said to me, "I'm starting out training, will you help me in any way?" I would help anyone I could help, absolutely anyone. And if they don't want to listen, fine, I don't mind that. But if anyone wanted help, I'd help them, absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, no, I've had an absolutely incredible time. I've also had some awful times. I mean, just desperate. But I think if you don't have the bad times, you don't appreciate the good ones anyway.
No, very true.
Yeah, you've got to have some falls before you appreciate what the good parts of it. And you've got to realise how hard it is.
Yeah.
But it's the same with any sport. I mean, it's a dedication. You know, I retired nearly 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
I still wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning most of the time. I did go through a spell where I was waking up a little bit later, but it was still only 6, 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
But generally, I still wake up. I can easily wake up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and I could easily get up and go and get on with stuff.
Yeah. So what do you occupy your days with now? Are you still in the space?
My girlfriend has got a rehabilitation centre, so she's got she has horses in for fitness, rehabilitation. She's got a water treadmill. Wow. Which is an amazing bit of kit. She's got a combi floor as well. So for dealing horses with injuries, it's amazing. And then we've got, I love all of it. I find it all fascinating. So we're getting she's getting horses in for injuries, she's getting horses in for fitness. A lot of eventers and dressage horses come in, but all sorts, absolutely all sorts. So you get little ponies and they have show ponies. So she has show ponies. Her daughter rides showing and very high level, so that they're all going on there every day as well. And it really does build them up. But the one thing that I find fascinating, partly because of what I've been doing before, is we have a mobile salt and oxygen therapy, right, which goes in the back of the horse box, and it's basically it's sea salt, dead sea salt in a brine, and it goes into this machine and it pumps it into the back of the horse box. But what's critical about it is the size of the particles. So when the horse has been in the back of the horse box, that horse box fills up and it's like a thick fog in there.
Yeah.
And they're breathing it in and it's also landing on their skin. And so if horses have cuts and sweet itch and those sort of problems, it helps enormously. When you see what it does with cuts, there was one horse she had in that it was staying.
Yeah.
And it had some sarcoids removed all from the top of its head,
Yeah.
all around its ears, but it wouldn't let you bathe them. It had become exceptionally head shy as a result of what had happened. Then it was also obviously very sore when it had them removed.
Yeah.
But it was going on the salt every day, and the speed it healed them up was extraordinary. But the most important thing is it's dealing with COPD, allergies, infections, lung infections, and it just has shocked me. I thought, yeah, yes, it's got to help. It's salt and something. And then you go out to people, and I think one of the most dramatic ones I went to, and this was, they were putting on a dressage horse that was coughing a bit, but they had another horse that was retired that was out in the field. And the woman said, she said, it's just coughs and coughs and coughs all the time. So I said, well, this is going to make a big difference. And you could see her thinking, well, we'll see about that. And I said, does it have any discharge from its nose? No discharge, just coughing. So I said, So it went on. And the first day, it had been on, they go on for 45 minutes. It came off. She went to tie it up so she could put its rug back on to turn it back out. It put its head down, and I am not exaggerating. There was probably 3/4 of a litre of white, thick mucus came out of its nose. She called me over. She said, come and look at this, come and look at this. And it was extraordinary. And that's what was making it coughing all the time.
Yeah.
Was the fact that that was down inside its lungs. So so the salt had got in there and loosened it all up. So when it put its head down, it just flooded out. And so the next day, it had 3 days treatment. The next day, I went up. There was probably half the amount of mucus came out. The day after that, almost nothing. And the horse stopped coughing.
Amazing.
And I say, when I go to, because I quite enjoy it. I get in the horse box, drive off, and it's starting to get busy now at this time of year because we're starting to come to the time when it's going to be really bad. But some horses have it in the winter because they're in all the time. So it's this, but yeah, it just, I think it helps every horse that has a problem.
Yeah.
But I would say that most horses, it cures them. And they can have been having steroids, they can be having all these drugs in nebulizers and things like that. And this fixes them. Now, it doesn't fix them forever. Because if they've got an allergy, the chances are it will come back.
It will come back, yeah, absolutely.
But there was one up near Heathrow I went to. I travel all over the place for this. I went to one in Heathrow, 2 horses in Heathrow that I'd treated before. One of them could not walk down the road without coughing and spluttering. And they think it's something, they can't work out what it is. It's in the environment there somewhere, because several on this yard are coughing all the time. But this old horse, it's almost completely eliminated the problems for 6 months. You're not even talking about eliminating them for, you'd think they'd come back after a few weeks.
Yeah.
But I think what happens is that the salt gets right down very deep inside and heals it. It actually heals the problems and the irritation that they've got. But that is going to come back in time if you keep them in the same environment.
Yeah.
It's going to. But so it lasted 6 months, then I went out and treated them again, and I said to them, look, next time, don't leave it 6 months. Instead of leaving it 6 months, call me out after 3 and I'll just come once, not for 3 days, just come one day.
Yeah.
And if you do it once every 3 months for one day, that'll probably be enough to maintain it. But every horse is different. But I find it
fascinating.
Yeah. And I've had people go on it. That was the one thing that got me as well. I had a young girl, was with her mother at this yard. And the mother said, oh, does it work for sinus infection? I thought she was talking about a horse. And I said, well, it will do, because it's all the same stuff. She said, oh, my daughter's got a sinus infection. She's had it for 2 years. They can't get rid of it. She said, I said, well, go on. So this girl, she was about 17, 18, went on. She was on it for about half an hour. She came off. And the mother said, oh, what do you think? And she said, you're not going to believe it. And she said, what do you mean?
No.
She said she hadn't been able to taste anything at all for over a year.
What?
She came off and she said, I can taste the salt on my lips. And if that is not, and it's used, they use it in Europe they use these in Europe for people. Why it's not being used for people now in this country? Because it's cheap as chips as well. I mean, it's so cheap. And there's no drugs involved.
No.
So if you've got ponies that they've got allergy problems, things like that, they start giving them steroids. The steroids then cause them to have other issues, including laminitis, which is the worst of it. And if they use this sort of thing, but I think the vets are sometimes a little bit... we can't do a proper medical study. It's hugely expensive. But I've seen it. I don't need to do a medical study.
No.
I've seen it.
Amazing.
It doesn't work for I'm not saying it's the be all and end all. But it's a lot better, I think, than any other form of treatment I've seen.
Absolutely. So
I'm involved in that.
Yeah.
To a certain extent.
Sounds like you're quite enjoying that.
No, I am. I don't go racing. I haven't been racing since I packed up. I'm
Really?
not saying I wouldn't go. I just feel... Do you know when you've been part of something for so long? To be going along as a spectator and not being part of it...
Would feel... Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's like... I've been to a few stag do's, even when I was training. They say, oh, we're going to go racing. Oh, great.
Yeah.
It's not really... And it's not because I don't enjoy it, but I want to be... If I'm going to go racing, I want to be part of racing.
Yeah.
Not a spectator.
Yeah, I see that. I get that. So what happened then to John Best Racing? Did any of your children interested or?
No.
No.
My youngest one would have possibly been interested, but she's too young. But no, Karen Jewell, her mother trained for years.
Yeah.
And they were selling me because they got small amount of planning permission on it. I just thought, oh, do you know what, Karen could... I don't think... Nothing against Linda, I get on really well with her, but I don't think I could have worked with her because I think we would have clashed too much with her ideas. But I said to Karen, why don't you come and we'll work together, which we did for a while. But I was working with the people who owned the yard, actually owned the yard, because I moved yards from Hucking. And the people who owned the yard that I moved to, which was much nicer and much better facilities and much easier to work around, they were Russian, and it started. For me, they didn't understand what I was trying to do.
Yeah.
And to try and get them on side to do what I want to do, it wasn't working. And we agreed to part ways, but I'd already got Karen involved, so she's still there.
Yeah.
And I got on really well with Karen. But I think she's probably having the same issues as me now with that, because at the end of the day, when you're training racehorses, the most important thing is the turnover of the horses.
Yeah.
You have got to have new horses in. It's the same with every sport.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether it's football, rugby, tennis. There's always got to be someone coming through.
Yeah.
But if you've got a team like a rugby and football, that's why they have the academies all the time.
Yeah.
And our academy is the 2-year-olds.
Of course.
And so you need the 2-year-olds coming in,
Yeah.
and you have to have the 2-year-olds. That doesn't mean to say they'll win you the most prize money, but they will win you the most prize money when they're 3. But you have to have them from when they're 2.
Yeah.
To mould them how you want them, and to have the ones you want, because if they're any good at 2, you can't afford to buy them at the end of their 2-year-old career anyway. No. So there's no point, and people won't be selling them anyway.
No.
So you've got to have the turnover of horses. It's the same with Will.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never been down to where he is, but I've been told that he's got hundreds of broodmares.
You should go.
And all he's doing, I guess, not all he's doing, but he's producing all of these young show jumpers.
Yeah.
And he's probably producing, I don't know, 100 a year. And of those, he's probably hoping to get one superstar a year.
Yeah.
And he probably doesn't even get that one superstar a year. I don't know.
Yeah.
He might have 10 good ones, but he probably doesn't get one. He probably gets one superstar every 2 to 3 years.
Probably, I would imagine.
So if he's producing 100, it just shows you how difficult it is. See, I wouldn't do it the way he's doing it.
No.
Although I don't know. But I suspect that if he worked out the cost of doing it, certainly in racing, if you start breeding, the cost of the breeding is so high, unless you're breeding right at the top level, you can't, it's very, very difficult to make money.
Yeah.
And the problem is that when you're breeding horses to race, when I was saying about the conformation and what you're looking to buy, you've got what you've got.
Of course.
You haven't got a choice. You can't go, I don't really like that one. Well, you can. You get rid of it, but you get nothing for it.
No.
Because if you don't like it, no one else is going to like it, probably.
No.
And, and if I was buying a show jumper, I'm not sure I'd be going to Will Funnell to buy a show jumper. Because if I wanted a really good one, he's not going to sell me a really good one.
No.
Quite rightly so. Because he wants that for himself. Or for his own owners, for him to jump.
Yeah.
So yes, if you want a show jumper that's going to jump 120s, 130s, he'll probably sell you 10 of those. But he's not going to sell you the one that's going to jump around the Derby, is he?
No, probably not.
Well, he will do, but he'll want an awful lot of money for it.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same with what we're doing. And I think that for Karen, the only way she'll be successful is if she keeps turning them over. And at the moment, she's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's not turning them over enough.
No. And why is that?
Because she hasn't got the support to help her turn them, to buy the youngsters in and turn them over.
Yeah.
It's got to be done. It's the only way to make, you know, I know what to do, but the trouble is you've got to have the money or the backing to do it.
Yeah.
I'd love to be buying horses for people, actually. That's what I would love to be doing. I would really enjoy that, going out, trying to find those superstars, because I know I can find them. Just need someone who says, right, go on then.
Yeah.
Here's the money.
That would be good fun.
Go and do it.
Slightly more maybe controversial question now, but there's a lot of protesters now, certainly at the Grand National.
Mm-hmm.
Is that to do with their issues with welfare, or what is their issue with racing in general? And what would you say to those people?
It is their issue with welfare and the horses not being treated correctly and being beaten to run faster and that sort of thing. And my view is, and I know it's right, I have absolutely no qualms about this, racing is probably the kindest equestrian sport.
Yeah.
Because you cannot force them to run. You can cajole them to run. You cannot force them. If they don't want to race, they will not race.
Yeah.
Horses are bred to race. It's like a sheepdog. A sheepdog is bred to round up sheep. A racehorse is bred to race. They want to race. They enjoy racing, and that's the way they're built.
Yeah.
They are looked after to such an extent compared to almost anything else, including humans. Yeah. If I have a horse that I have an injury and I want an MRI, I can have an MRI within 24 hours. My brother's just had to go for an MRI with the NHS. He actually had to give up. I think it was 8 weeks.
Wow.
Yep. That's till he got the appointment, and the appointment was likely to be another 6 to 8 weeks after that. So you're talking 4 months to get an MRI. Now he had a severe pains in his back. He had numbness down one leg, and they said unless it's a life-threatening emergency, you've got to go through the system. Whereas if I have a horse, I can have an MRI 24, 48 hours. I'll have the result. And when I get the results, I'll have, if I had a horse have an MRI this morning, I'll have had the results this afternoon.
Wow.
My brother went and actually paid to have a private MRI. He's still got to wait 4 to 5 days before he gets the results. And that's because they've got to go from the hospital to the doctor, and then the doctor's got to look at them, and you just think, with a racehorse, they get the best of everything. They get the best physio, they have the best veterinary treatment, they're kept warm, they're kept comfortable. Anything that's wrong, they get everything they could possibly get. Of course, there are people who don't treat racehorses correctly. The same as there's people who've got dogs who don't treat them correctly. It just doesn't matter. Everything that's going to happen. But for me, they are treated so well, and they're doing what they love. Yeah, and I love skiing. I love cars. I've got a thing about cars. If I was skiing down a mountain and I hit a tree and was dead like that. What a wonderful way to go.
Yeah.
And, these horses, I was lucky I didn't lose very many, but you do lose the odd one.
Yeah.
And the thing is that the trainer and the staff are actually the people who are looking after those horses on a day-to-day basis are generally much sadder than even the owners.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because they're properly connected. I'm not saying that's always the way, but the owners might be upset through their pocket, whereas the trainer and the staff are upset because they love that horse.
Yeah.
Or those horses, all of the horses. They generally love all of them.
Yeah.
And, I think that these people who are at the Grand National, who are protesting or wherever they go, they shouldn't be at the Grand National. No. They should be going round to these horses that are stuck out in fields in 10 or 12 inches of mud with very little food, no grass, freezing cold, soaking wet.
Yeah.
They're the ones they should be looking after.
Yeah.
Not the ones that are in the peak of condition and looking wonderful and
treated to the best of everything.
Yeah. And there are, you only have to, you could drive for an hour and you would see you'd almost certainly see a horse and think, poor thing.
Probably at least one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, protests is now happening with everything.
Yeah.
F1, there are even global concerns over F1 and trying to storm tracks and things like that. It's, it's happening pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I think that as we were talking about the problem with global warming with skiing and stuff like that, and I was talking to someone today. My girlfriend's actually South African, but I was talking to someone today who was South African as well. And she said her mother still lives in South Africa. And she said some of the heat out there now is just unbearable, and it wasn't the same that long ago. It is definitely getting worse. So the stop oil protesters and things like that, I just think they go about it the wrong way. That's all.
Yeah.
It's not that that the protests shouldn't happen, but when they block the M25 and there's all those cars sitting on the M25 pumping out fumes and all sorts of things, it's just
all the knock-on effects as well with things like that. In terms of, people not being able to say goodbye to loved ones and even people dying in the back of ambulances because they can't get through. And I agree. Not the way to go about or to conduct a protest. And actually, I think you breed more people to be angry about your cause rather than bringing light to it. It upsets people and actually brings people further away than what you're trying to, bring to light, I think. Because we all see it as wasting everyone's time, affecting people on in some cases, detrimental level, people that can't get to the hospital in time to say goodbye to loved ones, ambulances that can't get through, fire brigades that can't put out fires, etc., etc., etc. And you breed anger towards your cause rather than sort of togetherness.
Yes. Yeah. And they should be working to bring togetherness. That's exactly what they should be doing.
100%. Right. Well, thank you very much for giving up your evening and coming on. It's been very good. I've enjoyed it.
No problem.
So hopefully get you on at some point in the future and go again.
Yeah. I'm sure there's loads I've missed. So.